The eviction notice felt like ice in my hands, its crisp edges cutting through the warmth of my birthday celebration. Just moments ago, I'd been smiling, surrounded by family, thinking this was going to be my best birthday yet. I'm Vivienne, and this is how my 30th birthday became the day my family betrayed me. Open it, dear. We're all so excited for you to see what's inside. My mother had urged, her eyes twinkling with what I now realize wasn't joy, but anxiety. The fancy envelope had seemed innocent enough, wrapped in silver paper with a delicate bow. The living room of my childhood home, the one I'd spent the last 5 years renovating, was filled with familiar faces. My cousin Salah sat perched on the armrest of the sofa, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. My brother Jace stood by the fireplace, hands shoved deep in his pockets, avoiding my gaze. "Come on, Viv, we haven't got all day," Selah had chirped, her voice honey-sweet. I remember thinking how odd it was that she'd dressed up so formally for a simple family gathering. As I tore open the envelope, birthday cake still sweet on my tongue, the legal document inside made my stomach drop. Notice of eviction stared back at me in bold, unforgiving letters. What is this? My voice came out barely above a whisper. Mom? Dad? My mother's face crumpled. Sweetheart, we've been trying to find the right time to tell you. Tell me what? I stood up, the paper trembling in my hands. That you're kicking me out of my own home? The home I've poured my savings into? My heart into? Selah cleared her throat. Vivienne, be reasonable. The house was never officially yours. The deed is still in your parents' names, and they've decided it's time for a change. A change? I spun to face her. What do you know about this? I'm just trying to help the family make the best financial decision, she said, smoothing her designer skirt. The market's hot right now, and... The market? I laughed, but it sounded more like a sob. This is my home, not some investment property. My brother finally spoke up. Viv, maybe we should discuss this privately. No. I slammed the paper down on the coffee table, making the cake plates rattle. I want answers now. Mom, Dad, why are you doing this? My father wouldn't meet my eyes. There have been concerns about your ability to maintain the property properly. Selah has shown us some concerning documentation. Documentation? I felt like I was drowning. What documentation? I've done nothing but improve this house. Look around you. New hardwood floors, updated kitchen, restored Victorian details. I did all of that. With questionable contractors. Selah interjected softly. And there are the noise complaints from neighbors, the unauthorized modifications. That's absolutely false. My voice cracked. I turned to my best friend Paisley, who stood frozen in the corner. Paise, tell them. You've been here through all the renovations. Paisley stepped forward, her face fierce. Everything Vivienne's done has been by the book. I've seen all the permits myself, but my family's expressions remained unchanged. My mother reached for my hand. Sweetie, you have 30 days to... I jerked away from her touch. 30 days? To leave my home? On my birthday? The room started spinning. How long have you been planning this? Selah stood up, straightening her blazer. I think we should all calm down and discuss this rationally. The decision's been made, Vivienne. Fighting it will only make things harder. Looking at her face, that perfectly composed mask of false concern, something clicked. This wasn't just about the house. This was calculated, planned. The formal outfit, the documentation she'd mentioned, the way she'd positioned herself as the voice of reason. Get out, I whispered, then louder. Everyone get out. Vivienne, my mother started. Now, they filed out one by one, leaving only Paisley behind. As the door closed behind my family, I collapsed onto the couch, the eviction notice mocking me from the coffee table. Paisley sat beside me, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. This isn't over, Viv. Something's not right here, and we're going to figure it out. I wiped my eyes, anger replacing shock. You're right. Selah's behind this somehow. She's always wanted this house, ever since we were kids. I straightened up, a new determination flooding through me. And I'm going to prove it. Looking around at my beloved home, at the walls I'd painted, the fixtures I'd restored, the memories I'd built, I made a promise to myself. This wouldn't be the last birthday I'd celebrate here. Not if I had anything to say about it. The morning after my disastrous birthday, I sat at my kitchen counter, staring at my phone. 17 missed calls from Mom, 5 from Jace, none from Sella, of course. "You need to eat something," Paisley said, sliding a plate of toast in front of me. She'd stayed the night, sleeping on my couch like we used to do in college. "You can't fight this on an empty stomach." I pushed the plate away. "I can't eat. I need to figure out what Sella's been telling my parents." My hands shook as I pulled up my mother's contact information. "I'm calling her." "Put it on speaker," Paisley said, settling beside me. Mom answered on the first ring. "Vivian, thank goodness, we've been so worried." "Save it." I cut her off. "I want to know exactly what Salah's been saying about me." A heavy sigh crackled through the speaker. "Honey, it's not just what Selah said. She showed us documentation of unauthorized construction, complaints from the neighborhood association." "That's impossible." I slammed my hand on the counter. "I have every permit, every approval right here in my files." "Who specifically complained?" "Well, I don't have the actual complaints in front of me. Selah handled all of that." "Of course she did." I laughed bitterly. "And did you bother to verify any of it? To ask me about it before ambushing me on my birthday?" Silence stretched between us. "Mom?" "Selah said you deny everything." She finally replied, her voice small. "She said you've been struggling financially, that you've been cutting corners." "I want copies of everything," I demanded. "Every document, every complaint, everything Selah showed you. Today." "Vivian, please understand." "No, you understand. That house is my life. I've put every penny I have into it, and I'm not leaving without a fight." I hung up before she could respond. Paisley squeezed my shoulder. "That's my girl. Now what?" "Now we gather evidence." I grabbed my laptop. I need proof that Selah's lying. My phone buzzed. A text from Jace. "Meet me at Carlo's Coffee in 30. Need to talk." 20 minutes later, I walked into Carlo's, spotting my brother in our usual corner booth. His face was drawn, guilty. "You knew," I accused, sliding into the seat across from him. "You knew what they were planning." Jace ran a hand through his hair. "I found out yesterday morning. Mom and Dad swore me to secrecy. Said Selah had proof you were in trouble." "And you believed her?" "Of course not." He leaned forward. "Look, something weird is going on. Last week, I overheard Selah on the phone talking about property values and development opportunities in the neighborhood. My heart stopped. Development opportunities? Yeah. And get this, her fiancé Valentin? His family owns that new luxury condo complex downtown." The pieces started falling into place. Our street was one of the last historic areas in town, prime for development. My house sat on the largest lot. "She wants to sell it to developers," I whispered. "That's why she's doing this." "There's more," Jace said. "I did some digging. Selah's been meeting with the City Planning Commission. And guess who else attended those meetings?" "Mom and Dad?" He nodded. "They think they're protecting you from financial ruin, but Selah's playing them. She's convinced them selling is the only way to save you from yourself." My phone buzzed again. An email from Mom with attachments. I opened them, scanning quickly. "These documents." I showed them to Jace. "The letterhead is wrong. The permit numbers don't match my records. She forged them." "Keep your voice down," Jace warned, glancing around. "Selah's got friends everywhere." "I don't care. This is proof she's lying." I stood up, energized. "I need to show Mom and Dad." "Wait." Jace grabbed my wrist. "Selah's wedding to Valentine is in 2 weeks. Everyone will be there. Family, friends, business associates. If you're going to expose her, that's your chance to do it properly." I sank back into my seat, mind racing. 2 weeks to gather evidence, to prove she's trying to steal my home for her fiancé's development company. I'll help, Jace said firmly. So will Paisley. But we have to be smart about this. I nodded, determination replacing despair. Selah thinks she's won, that I'll just roll over and accept this. But she has no idea what I'm capable of. Walking home, I called Paisley. Hey, remember that friend of yours who works at the city planning office? We need to talk to her. Now. The game was on, and this time I was playing to win. The planning office smelled like stale coffee and printer ink. Paisley's friend Amanda pulled another file from the cabinet, adding it to the growing stack on her desk. These are all the development proposals for your neighborhood from the past 6 months, she said, keeping her voice low despite the empty office. Including 3 from Valrum Development Group, Valentine's company. I muttered, flipping through the pages. My hands froze on a familiar sketch. This is my house. Paisley leaned over my shoulder. Look at the date. This was filed 2 months ago. Before the eviction notice, I said, anger building. Before any of this started. Amanda glanced nervously at the door. There's something else? These signatures here? She pointed to the bottom of the document. Your parents' names, authorizing the preliminary survey. My stomach lurched. They've been planning this for months. Viv. Paisley grabbed my arm, pointing to another name. Look who notarized it. The name jumped off the page. Marcus Quinn, Selah's father. That sneaky little... I stopped as footsteps echoed in the hallway. Amanda quickly gathered the files, shoving them back into the cabinet. I've got copies at my desk, she whispered. I'll email them to you tonight. We barely made it out before someone entered the office. In the parking lot, I leaned against my car, trying to steady my breathing. We need to talk to Valentin, Paisley said. Maybe he doesn't know what Selah's doing. He has to know. His company filed the proposals. My phone rang. Jace. Sis, you need to get to Mom and Dad's. Now. What's wrong? Selah's here with some contractor talking about renovation plans. They're acting like they already own the place. I was already in my car. I'm coming. 15 minutes later, I stormed through my parents' front door. Selah's voice drifted from the kitchen, smooth as honey. The whole street will benefit from the modernization. Property values will soar. Over my dead body, I announced, making them all jump. Selah recovered first, her smile never wavering. Vivian, we were just discussing the neighborhood's future. You mean your future? Your fiancé's future? I slapped the development proposals on the kitchen table. When were you going to tell everyone about Valrum's plans? My mother's face paled. What is she talking about, Selah? Don't listen to her, Selah said quickly. She's just upset about the eviction. Show them, I demanded. Show them the real reason you want my house. The contractor cleared his throat awkwardly. I should go. Stay, Selah commanded. Vivian's just causing drama, as usual. Always so emotional about everything. Emotional? I laughed. You forged documents. You lied to my parents. You're trying to steal my home for your fiancé's development project. That's enough, my father shouted. Selah's been nothing but helpful. Helpful? I grabbed the proposals, throwing them in front of him. Look at the dates. Look at the signatures. She's been planning this for months. My mother picked up the papers with trembling hands. These aren't the documents you showed us, Selah. Because they're fake, Selah snapped. Vivian's desperate. She'll say anything. I have copies from the city planning office. I cut in. Official copies. Want to see them? For the first time, Selah's composure cracked. You went through official records? And I found everything. The fake complaints, the forged permits, the development plans. It's all there. The contractor stood up. Ms. Shelton, if there's some kind of legal issue... There's no issue, she said through gritted teeth. Everything's fine. My phone buzzed. An email from Amanda with the promised documents. I held up my phone triumphantly. Want to see the proof? It's right here. Selah's face hardened. You have no idea what you're doing, Vivian. No idea who you're dealing with. No, you have no idea who you're dealing with. I turned to my parents. Check your emails. I'm sending you everything. Every lie, every manipulation, every secret meeting with Valram Development. Selah? My mother's voice was small. Is this true? But Selah was already heading for the door, the contractor trailing behind her. At the threshold, she turned back. This isn't over, Vivian. Not by a long shot. After she left, silence filled the kitchen. My father stared at the documents, his face ashen. We should have asked you, he finally said. Should have verified. Yes, you should have. I gathered the papers. But now you know the truth. The question is, what are you going to do about it? I left them there, surrounded by evidence of their own misplaced trust. In my car, I called Paisley. Phase 1 complete, I said. Now we go after Valentin. Finding Valentin proved easier than I expected. He was at his usual lunch spot, a trendy cafe downtown with his sister Leah. I smoothed my blazer and approached their table, Paisley close behind me. Mind if we join you? I asked, not waiting for an answer before sliding into the empty chair. Valentin's fork clattered against his plate. Vivian, what are you doing here? Funny story. I was just at the city planning office looking at some very interesting documents about my house. Leah's eyes narrowed. Your house? The Victorian that Selah mentioned? The same one your brother's company plans to demolish, I said, watching Valentin's face carefully. Demolish? Leah turned to her brother. Val, what is she talking about? Valentin dabbed his mouth with a napkin. This isn't the place. It's exactly the place, I interrupted, pulling out the development proposals. Your company filed these 2 months ago. Before the eviction notice, before all of Selah's lies. Leah snatched the papers, her face darkening as she read. You're planning to tear down the entire street? Replace it with condos? It's a sound business decision, Valentin defended. The neighborhood's undervalued. It's my home, I cut in. And Selah's been manipulating my family to get it. She said your parents were willing sellers, Valentin said, but I caught the uncertainty in his voice. Paisley leaned forward. They were willing because Selah showed them forged documents claiming Vivian was mismanaging the property. She lied to everyone. Leah pushed her plate away, disgust evident. Is this why you're rushing the wedding? To close this deal? The timing is convenient, he admitted. Convenient? I laughed bitterly. You're destroying people's homes, their histories. Progress requires sacrifice. Valentin started, but Leah cut him off. No, this requires deception, and I won't be part of it. She stood up, gathering her things. Count me out of the wedding party. Leah, wait. Valentin called after his sister, but she was already storming out. I smiled sweetly. Trouble in paradise? You have no right to interfere in my business dealings, he hissed, and you have no right to my house. I stood up. By the way, I've sent copies of everything to the City Ethics Board. They're very interested in how Valram obtained those preliminary approvals. The color drained from his face. You're bluffing. Try me. I dropped a business card on the table. That's my lawyer's number. Use it. Outside, Leah was waiting by my car. I want to help. Why should I trust you? Because I've watched Selah manipulate my brother for months. Because I've seen the way she operates. Leah's eyes flashed. And because I have access to Valram's internal files. Paisley grabbed my arm. Viv, this could be huge. What's in it for you? I asked Leah. Justice, and the satisfaction of watching Selah's perfect plan implode. She pulled out her phone. Starting with these emails between her and my brother, dating back 6 months, I scanned the messages, my heart racing. There it was. Explicit discussion of their scheme to pressure my parents, to force the sale, to fast-track the development. This is exactly what we need, Paisley breathed. There's more, Leah said. Board meetings, private conversations, financial arrangements. I can get you everything. My phone buzzed. A text from Jace. Mom and Dad want to talk. They've seen the evidence. Looks like the tide is turning, I told Leah. But we need to move fast. The wedding's in 10 days. Perfect timing for everything to fall apart. She smiled grimly. I'll send you what I have tonight. As Leah walked away, Paisley turned to me. Are you sure about this? Using her? She's using us too, I pointed out. But right now, we want the same thing. My phone buzzed again. An unknown number. The message made my blood run cold. Back off now or you'll regret it. Some things are worth more than a house. S. Paisley read over my shoulder. She's threatening you. She's desperate, I corrected, saving the message as evidence. And desperate people make mistakes. I headed toward my car, determination fueling every step. Let's go see my parents. It's time to show them exactly who they've been protecting. The pieces were falling into place, faster than I'd hoped. But Selah's threat lingered in my mind, a warning that this fight was far from over. And something told me the worst was yet to come. I woke to the sound of breaking glass. Jumping out of bed, I rushed downstairs to find my front window shattered, a brick lying among the shards. A note was wrapped around it. Final warning. My hands shook as I called the police. While waiting, I texted Paisley and Jace. They arrived before the officers did. This has gone too far, Jace said, examining the brick. You need to be careful, Viv. I'm not backing down now. I handed the note to the police officer who was taking my statement. This is connected to a larger situation. I have documentation. Just file a restraining order, the officer suggested, looking bored. Not much we can do without proof of who threw it. After they left, Paisley helped me board up the window. At least we have Leah's evidence now. Those emails she sent last night are devastating. Speaking of which, I checked my phone. 3 missed calls from my mother. I need to go see them. They've had time to process everything. I'm coming with you, Jace insisted. 20 minutes later, we sat in our parents' living room. Mom's eyes were red from crying. We've been such fools, she whispered. All those documents Salah showed us, we wanted to believe she was helping. The development plans, Dad added, his voice heavy. We had no idea they planned to demolish the whole street. We thought they were just renovating. Selah knew exactly what buttons to push, I said. She played on your concerns about me, made you think I was in trouble. She's been manipulating this family for years, Jace added. Remember when she convinced you to give her grandma's jewelry instead of Viv? Mom's face crumpled. She said you didn't want it, that you thought it was old-fashioned. I never said that. I swallowed hard. Just like I never made unauthorized changes to the house. Never had complaints from neighbors. We know that now, Dad said. We've talked to everyone on the street. No one ever complained. In fact, they all love what you've done with the place. My phone buzzed. Leah. Emergency. Meet me at Riverside Park. Now. I have to go. I stood up. But first, are you with me on this? Really with me? Mom squared her shoulders. We'll do whatever it takes to make this right. At the park, Leah paced near the fountain, her face pale. Salah knows I helped you. She's threatening to reveal something about my past to the board of Valrum. What something? A mistake I made years ago. It could ruin my career. She ran her hands through her hair. I can't risk it. Hey, I grabbed her shoulders. Whatever it is, it can't be worse than what she's doing now. You don't understand. My whole life could fall apart. Then let it. The words came out harder than I intended. Sometimes you have to lose everything to do the right thing. Leah's eyes filled with tears. Easy for you to say. You're just fighting for a house. No, I'm fighting for justice, for truth. For every person Sela has ever manipulated or hurt. I softened my tone. Including you. She wiped her eyes. There's something else. I overheard Valentine on the phone. They're moving up the timeline. They want to close the deal right after the wedding. That's in a week. Less. The rehearsal dinner is in 3 days. Leah straightened up. You're right. I can't let her win. Not again. My phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. Hope you enjoyed the brick. Next time it won't be your window. S. I showed Leah the message. Her face hardened. She's really losing it. Good, I said. The more desperate she gets, the more mistakes she'll make. The rehearsal dinner, Leah said suddenly. All the investors will be there. The board members, the family. Perfect time to expose everything. But Sela will be expecting something. She'll be prepared. I smiled grimly. Then we'll have to be better prepared. I need every document, every email, every piece of evidence you can get. And I need them tonight. Leah nodded. I'll have them to you in 2 hours. As she walked away, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Paisley. Your mom just called. Salah's at their house. She's crying, saying you're trying to ruin her life. Your parents aren't buying it, but she's putting on quite a show. I texted back. Let her perform. In 3 days, she'll have a real reason to cry. The stakes were higher now, the threats more serious. But with each desperate move Sela made, she only proved how close we were to bringing her down. The countdown to the rehearsal dinner had begun. The day before the rehearsal dinner, I sat in my lawyer's office, surrounded by stacks of evidence. Sarah, my attorney, flipped through the documents with growing interest. These emails between Sela and Valram are damning, she said. And the forged documents? That's criminal. But is it enough? I asked. To stop the development? Absolutely. To press charges? Probably. She leaned forward. But are you sure you want to do this at the rehearsal dinner? It's perfect timing. All the investors will be there, plus the entire family. My phone buzzed. Another threat from Sela. Last chance to back down. Remember, I know about Miami. Sarah caught my expression. What's wrong? She's trying to blackmail me now. I showed her the text. But the Miami thing, it's nothing. Just a spring break mistake from college that she thinks she can use against me. Document everything, Sarah advised, handing me a USB drive. I've organized all the evidence here, including the police report about the brick. Are you sure you don't want private security? I'll be fine. Jason Paisley will be with me tomorrow night. Outside the office, I found Leah waiting in her car. Get in. There's something you need to see. She drove us to Valram's office building, parking in the underground garage. Valentine and Sela are in a board meeting upstairs, but look at this. She pulled out her tablet, showing me security footage from earlier that day. Sela was arguing with someone in the garage. Her father. Turn up the volume, I said. I can't keep covering for you, her father was saying. The notary stamps, the forged documents, it's too much risk. Daddy, please, just one more day. After the rehearsal dinner, it won't matter anymore. What's happening after the rehearsal dinner? I asked Leah. I don't know, but they've booked a private room at the restaurant. Invitation only, after the main event. My phone rang. Paisley. Viv, you need to get home now. Someone's been in your house. I broke every speed limit getting back. Paisley and Jace were waiting outside. Inside, my breath caught. Every renovation I'd done, every wall I'd painted, every fixture I'd restored, had been photographed and marked with bright red X's. They're documenting everything they plan to destroy, Jace said quietly. Paisley picked up a business card left on the counter. Look who's handling the demolition. The company name made my blood boil. It belonged to Sela's uncle. They're keeping it all in the family, I said bitterly. How did they even get in? Your mom called, Jace said. Sela asked to borrow her spare key this morning. Said she needed to measure for wedding decorations. And Mom gave it to her? No. But when she refused, Sela broke down crying. saying you were trying to ruin her special day. Mom felt guilty and admitted where she keeps the spare. I sank onto the stairs, looking at the red X's everywhere. This was my grandmother's house. I learned to walk on these floors. Had my first kiss in that bay window. And you're not going to lose it, Paisley said firmly. Tomorrow night, we end this. My phone buzzed with a text from Leah. Emergency. Salah's changed the seating arrangements. You're not invited to the private meeting anymore. Doesn't matter, I texted back. We'll do it during the main dinner. More witnesses that way. I spent the rest of the day with Sarah, finalizing our strategy. By nightfall, everything was ready. Lying in bed that night, I heard footsteps on my porch. Grabbing my phone to call the police, I crept to the window. But it was just my mother, leaving something by the door. I opened it to find a small package with a note. Your grandmother wanted you to have this. I should have given it to you years ago. Love, Mom. Inside was my grandmother's antique locket, the one Sela had claimed I didn't want. Opening it, I found a tiny photograph of my grandmother standing proudly in front of the house, the day she bought it. My phone lit up with one final threat from Sela. Hope you're ready for tomorrow, because I am. I touched the locket, then looked at the red X's marking my walls. Bring it on, I whispered. Tomorrow, everything would change. Either I'd save my home and expose Salah's schemes, or I'd lose everything I'd fought for. But looking at my grandmother's proud smile in that old photograph, I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going down without a fight. The rehearsal dinner couldn't come soon enough. The rehearsal dinner buzzed with nervous energy. Salah held court at the main table, resplendent in white, while Valentine worked the room, charming investors. I sat between Paisley and Jace, my grandmother's locket cool against my skin, waiting for the right moment. Look who just arrived, Paisley whispered. Sarah, my lawyer, walked in with Leah, right on schedule. Sela's smile flickered for just a moment before she recovered, rising to greet them. Leah, darling, I was worried you wouldn't make it after our disagreement. Wouldn't miss it, Leah said coldly, then turned to the assembled guests. Have you met Sarah? She's a fascinating person, specializes in real estate fraud. The room quieted slightly. Valentin appeared at Sela's side, his hand tight on her arm. Perhaps we should start the toasts, he suggested. Wonderful idea. I stood up, raising my glass. I'd like to go first. Sela's face drained of color. That's not on the program. Oh, but I insist. I moved to the center of the room. After all, what kind of cousin would I be if I didn't congratulate you on your achievements? The room fell silent. All eyes on me. Vivian, my mother warned softly. It's okay, Mom. I'm just going to share some interesting documents with everyone. I nodded to Sarah, who began distributing folders to the investors. Consider it my wedding gift. Security, Sela called out, but Leah was already blocking the door. Let's start with these emails, I continued, my voice carrying across the stunned room. Detailed plans to forge documents, manipulate my family, and steal my home for Valrum's development project. Valentine stepped forward. These are private business matters. Fraud is never private. Sarah interjected. Neither is forgery, which brings us to Exhibit B, the falsified complaints and permits, complete with unauthorized notary stamps from Sela's father. Sela's father stood up, face red. Now wait just a minute. The ethics board is very interested in your involvement, Sarah added smoothly. They'll be in touch. You're ruining everything, Sela shrieked, lunging for the folders. But Jace was faster, already passing copies to the board members. Like you tried to ruin my life? I asked. The threats? The brick through my window? The break-in? Gasps rippled through the crowd. Valentine's sister stood up. The police have been notified, she announced. About everything. Val, do something, Sela pleaded. But Valentine was busy reading the documents, his face growing darker with each page. You told me her family agreed to sell, that everything was legal. It was just business, Sela protested. A simple property acquisition. Simple? I pulled out my phone, playing the security footage Leah had given me. Selah's voice filled the room. After the rehearsal dinner, it won't matter anymore. What were you planning? Valentine demanded. What happens after dinner? Selah's silence was damning. Her father broke it. The demolition crew is scheduled for midnight, he admitted. We we thought if the house was already down, you were going to destroy my home? Tonight? My voice cracked. While everyone was celebrating your wedding? The room erupted in chaos. Investors stormed out. Board members huddled in corners. Family members argued loudly. Through it all, Selah stood frozen, her perfect world crumbling. The development deal is off, Valentine announced. And so is the wedding. But the deposits? The contracts? Selah's voice was small. Are void due to fraud, Sarah supplied helpfully, as is the eviction notice. My mother approached Selah slowly. How could you do this? To family? Because she never cared about family, I said quietly. Only power, control, getting what she wants no matter who she hurts. Selah's composure finally broke. You think you've won? You've ruined everything I worked for. No, I touched my grandmother's locket. You did that yourself. Every lie, every scheme, every betrayal. That was all you. The police arrived then, asking questions, taking statements. I watched as Selah's carefully constructed facade crumbled completely. The house is yours, my father said, hugging me tight. It always was. We forgot what family really means. Later, standing outside the restaurant, Paisley squeezed my hand. How does it feel? I looked at the night sky, thinking of my grandmother's photograph. Like justice, like home. My phone buzzed one last time. A message from Leah. Board meeting tomorrow. Val Ram's pulling out of all neighborhood developments. You did it. Justice indeed. But watching Selah being escorted to a police car, mascara streaking her cheeks, I felt no joy in her destruction. Only relief that my home, my family's legacy, was safe at last. The morning sun streamed through my newly repaired window as I sipped coffee on my front porch. The newspaper headline caught my eye. Valram Development faces investigation, CEO steps down. Below it, a smaller headline. Local woman charged with fraud, criminal conspiracy. My phone rang. Leah. Have you seen the news? Just reading it now. How are you holding up? Better than expected. The board appointed me interim CEO. Turns out exposing corruption has its perks. A car pulled into my driveway. My parents. Mom carried a large box while Dad lugged what looked like photo albums. I'll call you back, I told Leah. Mom set the box down carefully. We've been going through the attic, found some things that belong here. Inside were pieces of my grandmother's life. Her journals, recipes, old letters. Dad opened one of the albums, pointing to a yellowed photograph. That's her. The day she bought this house. Said it was the proudest moment of her life. Until you were born, Mom added softly. She always wanted you to have it. The screen door creaked open as Paisley emerged with more coffee. Look who just pulled up. A police car parked across the street. Officer Martinez approached, holding a document. Ms. Harding, we've recovered some items from Selah's office, things she took from your house. He handed me a folder. Also thought you should know. She's agreed to a plea deal. Full confession. Thank you, I said, taking the folder. Inside were old photographs she'd stolen years ago, claiming they'd been lost. The DA wants to know if you'll testify about the harassment, Officer Martinez added. I looked at my repaired window, remembering the brick, the threats, the fear. Yes, I will. He nodded and left. Mom touched one of the recovered photographs. Your 5th birthday, she said. Selah was so jealous of your party, she threw cake at you. We should have seen the signs back then. We all missed the signs, I said. But we can't change the past. Jace's truck rumbled up the street, Valentine surprisingly in the passenger seat. They carried construction supplies. "Before you say anything," Jace called out. He volunteered. Valentine set down a paint can. "I owe you. We all do. Let me help restore what we almost destroyed." I studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Start with the back porch. It needs new railings." The day unfolded like a healing breath. While Jace and Valentine worked on repairs, Mom and I sorted through grandmother's belongings. Paisley organized a neighborhood potluck on the lawn. Even Leah stopped by, bringing corporate documents showing Valrum's new commitment to historic preservation. "The board wants to establish a fund," she explained, "to help homeowners restore historic properties instead of demolishing them." "Karma works in mysterious ways," Paisley mused. As evening approached, neighbors gathered on my lawn, sharing food and stories. Mrs. Rodriguez from next door brought her famous empanadas. "Your grandmother loved these," she told me. She hosted dinners like this all the time. The house was always full of people, full of life. I touched my locket, thinking of the photograph inside. Maybe it's time to restart that tradition. Dad raised his glass. "To new beginnings." "And old foundations," Mom added. My phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. "Plea deal finalized. Selah's serving time. The house is officially safe." Looking around at my gathered family, friends, and neighbors, I realized something. This house wasn't just walls and windows, not just a property to be saved. It was a home, alive with memories and possibilities. "You know," Paisley said, "your birthday's coming up again." "No surprise parties this time," I laughed. "No," she agreed. "But maybe a housewarming to celebrate properly?" I watched Jace and Valentine arguing good-naturedly about porch designs, Mom sharing grandmother's recipes with neighbors, Dad telling stories about the house's history to enthralled listeners. "I'd like that," I said. "A fresh start." The evening wind carried the scent of blooming jasmine, grandmother's favorite. She'd planted it along the fence years ago, and like the house itself, it had endured. "To fresh starts," I raised my glass, "and to coming home." The gathered crowd echoed the toast, their voices mixing with crickets and distant wind chimes. This was what Selah never understood, what no development plan could capture. The heart of a home, beating strong through generations. I sat on my porch steps, surrounded by love and laughter, knowing that while the battle for my house was over, the story of this home was just beginning. And this time, every page would be filled with joy, not fear. With welcome, not walls. With family, the kind you're born to and the kind you choose. This was my legacy, my victory, my peace. And it was beautiful.
Hey, what are you doing? That hurts. Where is this? What are you planning to do to me? One day, my mother-in-law grabbed me from behind and locked me in complete darkness. She had trained in boxing before, so she could easily lift a single woman. I couldn't resist as my eyes, mouth, and limbs were all bound. "Be quiet. This is your fault for being so insolent. How dare you, a mere daughter-in-law, defy me? Ever since you came, you've ruined my happy life. Everything, absolutely everything, is your fault." Saying this, my mother-in-law left me immobilized and went somewhere. In this state where I couldn't see anything or call for help, my anxiety gradually transformed into terror. What should I do? Am I going to die here without anyone finding me? I still wanted to spend wonderful days with my husband and have children. But is my life going to end at the hands of my mother-in-law? The moment I thought this, intense fear swept through my body again, and I kept making voiceless cries. My voice reached no one. My name is Erin, and I'm just an ordinary housewife. I married Ron a few years ago, and we've been living happily together until today. I met Ron at the company where I started working after graduating from college, and we began dating. Although the path to marriage had its ups and downs, the fact that I'm now happily married is all that matters. Recently, we made a decision that would likely accelerate our happiness even further: buying our own home. And not just any home, a custom-built house. While the idea that owning a home equals happiness might be a bit old-fashioned, being able to choose the floor plan and create a house just for us is no small feat, and being fortunate enough to do so makes me very happy. Apartments have their advantages, but if we're going to settle down somewhere, a house would be better, right? Ron, who had grown up in his parents' house and lived in detached homes all his life, readily agreed to building our own home. Once decided, things moved quickly. Within days of deciding to build our home, we were discussing floor plans and various requirements with the home builder, and plans progressed steadily. Finally, our home was completed. That day, we came for the handover of our newly completed home. We weren't the only ones visiting the new house. My in-laws said they wanted to see it too, so they joined us. To be honest, I was a bit uncomfortable with this. Although we live separately from my in-laws and only meet occasionally, so I don't know them very well yet, there are some things I can tell. While there's nothing particularly wrong with my father-in-law, my mother-in-law is incredibly critical. She starts with negativity for everything and lists all the things she doesn't like. When I decided to marry Ron and went to greet his parents, while my father-in-law contrasted warmly by saying, "Please take care of my son," my mother-in-law kept criticizing me, saying things like, "Isn't there a better woman out there?" and, "Can such a skinny body bear healthy children?" Of course, I understand the need to evaluate your son's marriage partner from various perspectives, but there should be a better way to express such concerns. Especially regarding physical appearance, even after marriage, she would say things like, "Eat more and gain weight," or "Do strength training," whenever we met. Speaking of my mother-in-law, she had a surprisingly sturdy and healthy-looking body for her age. When I asked Ron, "Why is your mother so well-built?" it turns out that her family has practiced boxing for generations. Even Ron had done boxing until high school, which explains his good physique. I suppose that's the secret to physical excellence in athletic families. Perhaps because of these values, my mother-in-law doesn't like my build. Moreover, while it would be one thing if these were just concerns about my health, what she's actually focused on is my potential future children. I'm going to make my grandchild a great boxing champion. That's my dream. I've heard those words countless times. I'm not even pregnant yet. With a mother-in-law like that, it was inevitable that she would find fault with our new home. Hey, there's no room large enough to teach boxing. And where's our room? We're not living together now, but we will in the future, right? Besides, this house feels old-fashioned overall. Underfloor storage in the kitchen. Do modern houses even have that? Aaron, could it be that you have no aesthetic sense? That's what my mother-in-law said after entering and looking around our newly built home. Why would she say such mood-dampening things when my husband and I are about to start living here? The only consolation was that Ron and his father took my side. This is the house where Aaron and I are going to live together. Why should we have to match it to your taste, Mom? Besides, we haven't even discussed living together, let alone decided anything about it. Don't make such arbitrary decisions. My father-in-law nodded beside him and added his support. That's right, Ron and Aaron have kindly invited us to see their new house today. We should be grateful for just that. Don't say such rude things. Well, the reason we invited my in-laws was that my mother-in-law had insisted on seeing the house. Scolded by Ron and my father-in-law, my mother-in-law reluctantly said, I know, and fell silent for a while. Then my father-in-law turned to me and said, by the way, I'm happy that you invited us, but wouldn't you like to invite your family too? It feels wrong to only accommodate us. Come to think of it, I haven't met your sister yet, have I? I'd very much like to greet her. My father-in-law probably tried to change the awkward atmosphere by bringing up a new topic, but that particular subject wasn't very welcome. Well, my family lives far away, so it's not easy to arrange quickly. Well, there's no rush, so I'm thinking about it for some time later. But as for my sister, well, my sister and I don't get along very well. When I said this looking down, my father-in-law made an apologetic face as if he'd said something he shouldn't have and said, I'm sorry. No, it's totally fine. Please don't worry about it, I apologized too. This was my fault. I feel like I could have said it better. However, there was a reason why it was difficult to explain to my in-laws why my sister and I didn't get along. And so we fell back into silence, and the new house tour ended in an awkward atmosphere. Despite the inauspicious atmosphere, Ron and I moved our belongings into the new house and successfully began our new life. Indeed, having a larger house compared to an apartment gives a sense of openness that feels good. We don't have to worry as much about noise as we did in the apartment, and it's more relaxed. As my mother-in-law pointed out, we might even consider having children. Of course, it's not all positive. Cleaning a larger space will be more work, and running costs like the mortgage and property tax will be considerable from now on. But we'll probably get used to those things, and for now, I just want to feel unbridled joy. Ah, if only we could continue this happy life. Such thoughts proved futile, as a few months after moving into our new house, an ominous shadow crept into our lives. One day, we received news that my father-in-law had been injured. As we heard the story, he had been taking his daily walk when he slipped on some stairs at a pedestrian bridge, perhaps because the previous day's rain hadn't completely dried. Fortunately, it wasn't life-threatening, but he had cut his head and bruised his whole body. What was even more serious was that he had broken both legs. While one leg only had a fracture, neither leg was in perfect condition. Due to these circumstances, my father-in-law needed care. Just when we thought we could get by with, thank goodness it wasn't life-threatening. Let's visit him soon, my mother-in-law seized the opportunity to propose living together. It's hard taking care of a husband who can't move. After all, I'm just a fragile woman, aren't I? So I thought I'd like your help by living together. Only now does she call herself a fragile woman. Usually, she insults me about my poor physique and acts superior. While I'm worried about my father-in-law, living with my mother-in-law is worrying in a different way. Well, I understand it's hard for Mom to take care of Dad alone, but living together depends on what Aaron says, Ron told his mother. While it might sound like he was being considerate of me, it really just meant I had to make the choice about living together. And I didn't have the courage to say, I'm concerned about father-in-law but don't want to live together. In the end, a few days later, my in-laws came to live in our new house. And as expected, my mother-in-law started harassing me. After moving in together, she pushed all the care for my father-in-law onto me, while she either watched TV in the living room or went running to keep in shape. If she has that much energy, taking care of my father-in-law shouldn't be too difficult. She also complains about my housework, especially my cooking. Make more muscle-friendly meals. Isn't there too much fat in this? This is inedible. My mother-in-law would say this and throw all the food I made into the garbage. Then she would go to the nearby supermarket and return with chicken and milk. I don't mind if she has particular preferences about food. Everyone has their freedom. But she could just say, "I won't eat it," before I prepare the meal. No, my mother-in-law probably enjoys intentionally doing things that hurt me. She also throws my laundry into the garden, saying, "This way of hanging clothes will cause wrinkles, do it again." Of course, the clothes thrown and covered in sand are all mine, while she carefully rehangs the clothes belonging to herself, my father-in-law, and Ron. Even with cleaning, she finds fault, saying things like, "The corners aren't clean enough," or "There are fingerprints on the desk," and "Do it all over again," then dumps the vacuum cleaner's contents all over the room. And if I complain, saying, "Please stop," she always responds with, "You lack the resolve to be a proper wife." Really, where did she learn such daughter-in-law harassment? Has she been spending too much time on the internet? Nevertheless, I was taking psychological damage. Between the unfamiliar caregiving and my mother-in-law's attitude, both physical and mental fatigue were accumulating. Around the time my father-in-law's injury was mostly healed and close to full recovery, I finally told Ron, "I can't take it anymore." Although Ron hadn't witnessed me being harassed due to work and other reasons, he had apparently noticed there were problems with his mother from my unusual level of exhaustion. "I'm sorry I couldn't listen to your concerns earlier. If you've reached your limit, let's have Mom and Dad move out." Fortunately, Dad's injury has improved considerably, and their old house is still there. "I'll talk to them tomorrow." What? Their old house hadn't been sold yet. When I asked Ron for details, it seems my father-in-law had delayed selling the house so they could end the living arrangement if things didn't work out. I'm so grateful for my father-in-law's thoughtfulness. While I felt bad about making my father-in-law leave too, I no longer had the capacity to think about anything beyond protecting my own mental health. The next day, Ron said, "Mom, I heard from Aaron." Well, since we're all human, it's natural that some people get along and others don't. But that's no reason to bully her. If you dislike Aaron that much, we'll end this living arrangement. I'm sorry, Dad, but please leave. Hearing this, my father-in-law made a face that seemed to say, "It can't be helped." I wondered how my mother-in-law was feeling as I observed her expression. I thought she would explode in anger at me for telling Ron and shower me with abuse. However, such expectations were wrong. My mother-in-law collapsed to her knees in front of us and began wailing loudly. "No, please don't say such terrible things. I was just possessed by something momentarily. Really, I won't do it again, please forgive me." Saying this, my mother-in-law repeatedly prostrated herself before us. When it went this far, even I couldn't tell her to leave. I decided to forgive my mother-in-law. However, I would soon realize this choice was a mistake. For a while after that, we lived more amicably than before. My father-in-law's injury had healed completely, so he no longer needed care, and my burden was minimal. If this life continued, maybe the daughter-in-law harassment would someday be just a funny story. It was around the time I started thinking such thoughts. One day, Ron told me he had a week-long business trip scheduled. Come to think of it, since my mother-in-law's harassment had stopped, Ron hadn't been away from home for more than a day. Perhaps this week would be a crucial test for my mother-in-law and me. Whether she would harass me without Ron's eyes on us. While I was thinking about such things, that crucial moment never came. This was because my mother-in-law decided to go on a trip with my father-in-law during Ron's business trip. Aaron, you must be tired from your daily housework, right? So I thought you should relax and take it easy while Ron is away. You probably couldn't rest easy with us around, right? Well, it's only for 2 nights and 3 days though. And so it was suddenly decided that I would temporarily live alone during Ron's business trip. However, this was convenient. Actually, my sister, with whom I had been almost completely estranged, had recently said, "I want to talk about something, can we meet?" Normally, if someone you're estranged from says, "I want to talk," you'd be wary, but somehow I feel this won't be a bad conversation. That's why I wanted to meet right away, but with housework and living with my in-laws, I hadn't been able to secure time to meet my sister. But if I'm going to be alone in the house, I can invite my sister. I also want to show her our newly built home. When I communicated this, my sister replied, "Sure," so I was about to reunite with her after several years. On the day of the business trip, Ron left home about 2 hours later than usual to head directly to his destination. My in-laws had also completed their travel preparations and left a few minutes ago. And a few minutes after that, my sister Halia came to the house. Although it was earlier than planned, I didn't mind at all. My sister hadn't changed much since the old days, and it seemed Halia thought the same about me. We hugged each other and said, "It's been so long," and when we tried to check our calendars on our phones saying, "When was the last time we met?" we noticed our phone cases were the same. What a coincidence. Even though we hadn't properly talked for years, it felt like we were still connected somehow. Because of things like that, we were able to instantly bridge the gap of time we hadn't seen each other. So the reason I came today is, just as Halia was about to get to the main point after I served her tea and we sat down, my phone rang. It was from Ron. Halia looked at me and said, "Go ahead and answer it," so I did. "Aaron, I'm sorry. I forgot some documents I need for today's business trip in my room. I hate to ask, but could you bring them to the station?" "I'm really sorry." Thinking this was serious, I asked Halia, "Is that okay?" "It's fine. We haven't talked for years, so what's a few more hours?" she joked in response. So I said, "I'll be back in about an hour," and dashed to the station with Ron's requested belongings. An hour later, when I returned home, Halia's shoes were still at the entrance. I called out, "I'm home," but there was no response from Halia. Had she fallen asleep? Thinking this, I went to the living room, but couldn't find her anywhere. I tried calling Halia's phone. Then, in this room where I was alone, Halia's phone rang on the desk. 3 days later, my in-laws returned from their trip. And Ron and I greeted them as they came back home. Why is Ron already back? The business trip was supposed to be a week. And Aaron, why are you More than Ron, your reaction suggests it's strange that I'm even here. My mother-in-law seemed to realize her slip of the tongue and said, "That's not it," but when she saw my sister Halia entering the living room, she began sweating and trembling as if having a bad dream. Going back to that day when Halia came to visit. When I returned home after delivering Ron's belongings, although her shoes and belongings like her phone remained, Halia had disappeared from the house. With her phone still here, there was no point in calling, and her home wasn't close enough to return within an hour. So there was no point in contacting her family, and anyway, it made no sense that she would leave her belongings. Wondering if she might be in the bathroom, I searched the entire house but couldn't find her. Then I heard suspicious sounds coming from the kitchen. When I went to check, the sound was coming from the underfloor storage. When I gathered my courage and opened it, there was Halia. When I asked her why she was in such a place, she revealed something incredible. I think it was Ron's mother, but as soon as she came back home, she suddenly told me to get a vase from the underfloor storage. I tried to explain that I wasn't Erin, but she came at me aggressively. So I opened the underfloor storage, but there was nothing there, and when I tried to ask what was going on, she lifted me from behind and threw me in. Oh no. So my mother-in-law hadn't reformed after all. Then she said things like, "It's your fault Ron hates me," and "How dare you defy me, mere daughter-in-law," and finally, "Suffer from hunger until we return." She took my phone and closed the door. I couldn't open it from the inside, and who knows what would have happened if you hadn't come. How terrible. So if Halia hadn't come to visit, I would have been trapped in the underfloor storage until my in-laws returned. Actually, Halia and I are twins. Although I had told my in-laws I had a sister, I hadn't mentioned we were twins. So my mother-in-law probably mistook Halia for me and locked her in the underfloor storage. Since our phone cases were the same, she probably didn't think it belonged to someone else. She must have thought that taking the phone would prevent contact with anyone, so she left it on the desk. She probably told my father-in-law she had forgotten something and came back home. Really, what nerve. By the way, the reason Halia and I had fallen out was that when I started dating Ron, Halia had also fallen for him. That triggered us to become rivals competing for Ron, viewing each other as enemies, and led to our estrangement when Ron and I got engaged. However, Halia had reconsidered various things and came to make amends, but because of my mother-in-law, she got caught up in this situation. Later, when Ron questioned his mother about why she did this, she answered that, before going on the trip, I planned to lock Erin in the underfloor storage to teach her about hierarchy through fear. That's ridiculous. This time I've really lost my patience. Dad, I'm sorry, but this living arrangement ends here. Take Mom and go back home. I won't let Mom see Erin anymore, and I won't see her either. We're cutting ties. Hearing these words, my father-in-law made a face that seemed to say, "It can't be helped." "Please, I'm really sorry," my mother-in-law cried again and prostrated herself, but no one believed her anymore. "I could report you to the police, Mom." But Halia said, "That's not necessary, so we're just cutting ties. Leave before I change my mind." Even my mother-in-law seemed to have no choice but to obey Ron when the word "police" came up, and she began packing her things hurriedly. The next day, she left with my father-in-law. Thus, I was finally freed from my mother-in-law's harassment. A few days later, Halia visited again to tell me what she had wanted to say that day. Actually, what I wanted to tell you was, "You're getting married, right?" Halia looked surprised for a moment, but then relaxed her face and laughed, saying, "You could tell, huh?" Since we were young, we'd occasionally experienced strange sympathy. It was easier to transmit when emotions were strong, and we could intuitively understand each other's state. Whether this was a twin-specific ability or just coincidence, we don't know, but because we could understand each other's feelings, our rivalry over Ron had become particularly intense. Because we could tell the other person was serious. Well, that's all in the past now. Ron and I started living happily again in our home, and Halia seems to be getting along well with her partner. I thought this would be the end of the story, but one day we received sad news from my father-in-law. It turns out he had decided to divorce. Since being cut off by Ron, my mother-in-law had become emotionally unstable and increasingly prone to outbursts, often taking it out on my father-in-law. Since my mother-in-law was exceptionally strong compared to her peers, it was difficult for my father-in-law to restrain her, and after learning about what she had done to me, his feelings for her had cooled, leading to this decision. And to divide their assets for this, they would demolish their old house, sell the land, and convert it to money. Ron, if you want to take a last look at the house, come soon. Also, your mother's mental state isn't good, so I think she'll be entering a facility. Well, don't worry about it. When I heard this, I honestly felt a sense of guilt. However, this was my mother-in-law's own doing, and it was my father-in-law's decision, so it wasn't my place to interfere. The day before their house was to be demolished, I received a text message from my mother-in-law. "I have truly caused you great trouble. I will soon be moving into a nursing home and likely won't be able to go out as before. Therefore, I would like to apologize to you in person one last time, so I request that you come to the house before it's demolished tonight." It was a message that perfectly embodied humility and deference. To think that my incredibly arrogant mother-in-law would say such things. Perhaps being abandoned by everyone and facing life in a facility had made her repent. Thinking this, I, who had been feeling guilty these past few days, wanted to grant my mother-in-law's final wish. And so that night, I visited their house that would be torn down the next day. While I waited in front of the house, I saw my mother-in-law approaching from afar. My mother-in-law waved at me and jogged toward me, not wanting to keep me waiting. Then her running speed seemed to gradually increase, reaching top speed by the time she got close to me. Before I knew it, I was lying in the garden of their house. I felt pain in my abdomen and back, and when I looked, my mother-in-law was straddling my lower body. Yes, I had been tackled by my mother-in-law and knocked down into the garden. The moment I realized this, I was struck with terror and tried to scream, but there was no chance as my mother-in-law moved behind me and covered my mouth with her palm. Then I felt pressure from her arm around my carotid artery, and everything went dark. When I regained consciousness, it was still pitch black in front of me. It seemed tape or something similar had been applied, robbing me of my vision. Moreover, the tape wasn't just on my eyes, my mouth and all my limbs were bound too. I sensed someone nearby. When I tried to call for help, my voice was barely audible. However, perhaps noticing I had regained consciousness, the person nearby spoke. "You brought this on yourself." It was my mother-in-law's voice. And I thought third time's the charm. I really thought she had reformed this time. I'm such a fool. I was completely deceived by my mother-in-law's message. Even though Ron had said, I can't really recommend meeting with his mother, I felt sorry for her and came anyway. That's right, Ron. Maybe he would notice something wrong when he got home. Then I remembered. Ron was on a business trip today. When Halia was locked in the underfloor storage, I contacted Ron, and he immediately cut short what was supposed to be a week-long business trip to return. Because of that, he now had to go on another business trip to finish his work. What should I do? While desperately thinking, my mother-in-law started speaking again. It's all your fault. Since you came, my family gradually fell apart. I lost everyone on my side. And finally, everything shattered. It's all your fault. So I'm going to make you disappear. I'll leave you in this house. Then tomorrow, you'll be torn apart with it. Why am I doing this, you ask? It's obvious. Since the family fell apart after you came, if you disappear, my family will return to normal. I'm such a genius. It seems my mother-in-law had truly lost her mind. But I can't worry about that now. At this rate, my body might really be torn apart tomorrow. What should I do? My mind is overwhelmed with anxiety and fear. I can't stop shaking. Ignoring my terror, my mother-in-law said, "Well then, I'm heading back. Thanks for everything," and left. I tried to cry out for help many times, making voiceless sounds. But my mouth was taped shut, and being inside the house, it was meaningless anyway. And so, without anyone noticing me, tomorrow I would be cut in half by heavy machinery and leave this world. Well, thankfully that didn't happen. While I was having such dark thoughts and my fear kept growing, I heard some noise from somewhere and a voice calling, "Aaron." Then that person quickly came to me, saying, "Are you okay?" while forcefully peeling off the tape stuck to me. Although it hurt when the tape was removed because it had caught some of my hair, that didn't matter at all. When I realized the person who had saved me was Halia, I burst into tears of relief. "Halia, how did you know I was here?" When I asked this, Halia smiled mischievously and answered, "Twin sympathy, maybe?" Well, actually being able to come here was thanks to Ron. I could tell you were feeling intense fear. I thought something might have happened and frantically contacted him, and when he said you might have gone to his parents' house, I rushed here. This is payback for when you helped me. While saying this, Halia finished removing all the tape that had been restraining me. Then Halia and I escaped from the soon-to-be demolished house and managed to secure our safety. Afterward, we contacted Ron to inform him we would file a police report, and together with Halia, I went to the police station, which led to my mother-in-law's arrest. While it was unfortunate that my mother-in-law was arrested, it was nothing but her own doing, and Ron said, "Don't worry about it. There's no way excuses like 'I didn't think I would get arrested' can work after putting you through such an ordeal." My mother-in-law received a prison sentence and will spend several years in jail. Although her mental state wasn't good, it wasn't considered severe enough to be taken into account. There was no room for leniency. After that, the injuries I sustained from my mother-in-law's tackle healed, and I was able to attend Halia's wedding safely. It was truly a wonderful ceremony. From now on, I want to work hard to protect our own happiness. Soft spring sunlight streamed into the upscale Cambridge neighborhood. In her white mansion on Brattle Street, Melissa Brown was preparing breakfast. At the marble kitchen counter, she carefully made blueberry pancakes while considering her son's nutritional needs. Her former habits as a pediatrician were still deeply ingrained in her daily life. "Daniel, breakfast is ready." Footsteps thundered down the stairs. Her 8-year-old son Daniel appeared with his usual bright smile, wearing blue pajamas with his brown hair slightly disheveled. "Good morning, Mom. I'm so excited about swimming at the YMCA today. The coach said I might move up to the advanced class soon." Melissa gently stroked her son's head while plating the pancakes on a floral dish. Once a practicing pediatrician, she had chosen to become a full-time homemaker. This decision was partly to support her husband Michael's career, but more importantly, it stemmed from her strong desire to closely watch her son grow up. "Did Dad leave early again today?" There was a hint of loneliness in Daniel's voice. He seemed to be keenly aware of the decreasing time spent with his father lately. "Yes, he had an important meeting. But we'll spend time together this weekend. Dad's looking forward to it too." As she answered, Melissa felt a small knot of anxiety in her chest. Michael, working as an executive at a major pharmaceutical company, was doing his best for the family. At 42, his responsibilities at work were continuously growing. However, something about him had seemed different lately. It started around the time his mother Carol's phone calls became more frequent. Melissa had often witnessed her husband talking on the phone with his mother late into the night. Carol Brown was Michael's mother. Raised in an old Boston family, she was a woman with a strong desire to control her son. From the beginning of their marriage, she had never approved of Melissa. The reason lay in Melissa's background. Carol had always resented her for coming from an ordinary family that couldn't be called wealthy. "He should have married someone more suitable for our social circle, not just some doctor. She'll never fit into our society." Melissa still vividly remembered those words from her mother-in-law, as if they were spoken yesterday. William, Michael's father, was a mild-mannered man who, despite his background as a retired shipping company executive, showed genuine kindness to his grandson Daniel. However, even he could never stand up to Carol. Melissa and Michael's story began during their residency. They naturally gravitated toward each other while participating in the same training program at Massachusetts General Hospital. Late-night shifts, sincere dedication to patients, passion for medicine, their shared values brought them together. When they decided to marry after 2 years of dating, they faced Carol's fierce opposition. "Of all people, why her? Are you trying to tarnish our family lineage? Michael, you're ruining your future." Though they married for love despite the opposition, their relationship with Carol worsened rather than improved after Daniel's birth. Her mother-in-law's words grew increasingly bitter over the years. "Despite being my grandson, he only shows traits from your family line. You're raising him all wrong. You need to be stricter with him. You're spoiling him too much. Even though he's Michael's child, he's becoming more like you. What a shame." Her mother-in-law's words always stung like thorns. Melissa was especially hurt whenever Carol criticized her parenting decisions. She had carefully considered every aspect of child rearing, both as a physician and as a mother. Amidst this tension, plans emerged for a cruise to celebrate her in-laws' 40th wedding anniversary. It would be a 3-night, 4-day journey on a small cruise ship departing from Port Miami in Florida, with about 200 passengers. The family trip was scheduled during spring break. When Melissa heard about this plan, anxiety crept into her heart. The thought of spending extended time with her mother-in-law in the confined space of a ship made her chest tighten. However, this might be an opportunity to repair family bonds. For her son's sake and her marriage, she wanted to make the most of this chance. That's why she decided to join, not knowing that this decision would dramatically change her life. At Port Miami Terminal, the white hull of the Celebrity Edge gleamed in the morning sun. The relatively small cruise ship was about 170 meters long with a passenger capacity of 200. Some passengers were already visible on deck. "Wow! What an amazing ship!" Daniel exclaimed with sparkling eyes. Beside him, Carol clicked her tongue disapprovingly. "Don't be so noisy. It's not becoming of a Brown family child." At those words, Daniel's shoulders trembled slightly. Melissa instinctively squeezed her son's hand tightly. Michael silently carried his parents' luggage. Melissa felt conflicted watching her husband meticulously attend to his parents, being more fastidious than usual. What should have been a joyous anniversary celebration was already shrouded in a heavy atmosphere. After checking in, they were guided to their rooms on the ship. Melissa's family room was on the 8th floor, while her in-laws' luxury suite was on the 10th. The mere 2-floor difference seemed to symbolize the divide in this family. After unpacking, "We have the welcome lunch at noon," Carol announced in a commanding tone. "Don't be late. I've planned every moment of our time on this ship." Once in their room, Daniel immediately rushed out to the balcony. "Mom, look. The ocean is beautiful." Her son's innocent voice brought a moment of peace to Melissa's heart. However, that tranquility wouldn't last long. At the welcome lunch, bottles of expensive champagne ordered by Carol were opened one after another. Her mother-in-law was drinking more alcohol than usual. Beside her, William silently continued his meal. "Melissa, with your way of raising him, Daniel will never be fit to be the Brown family heir." Perhaps due to the champagne, Carol's tone grew sharper. "I'm the one who made you quit being a doctor and become a housewife. You should be grateful." Michael only nodded at his mother's words. Suddenly, Melissa recalled the image of him during their residency days, rushing around for his patients. Where had that passion gone? In the afternoon, the ship departed from Miami Port. The deck was filled with families taking commemorative photos. However, the Brown family's photo session was tense and uncomfortable. "Daniel, stand up straighter. That smile is too forced. Melissa, step back a little more." Amidst Carol's constant instructions, William unusually spoke up. "Carol, let's take a break." His voice carried a hint of weariness. Dinner was arranged separately for Melissa's family and her in-laws. "We'll have adult time," Carol had declared. At the 8th floor buffet restaurant, Melissa was selecting dishes to suit her son's tastes. Outside the window, the sunset was painting the sea red. Michael was checking messages from his mother on his smartphone. That night, Melissa couldn't sleep. When she stepped out onto the balcony, the waves gently rocked beneath the moonlight. On the second morning, Carol was already drinking wine at the family breakfast table. During the morning, Daniel was swimming in the ship's pool. Melissa felt proud watching her son demonstrate the swimming skills he'd learned at the YMCA. However, Carol's expression suddenly twisted as she watched from a deck chair by the pool. That child is so impudent, trying to show off in front of everyone. Running around the poolside, he has no manners. This is the result of your parenting, Melissa. Her mother-in-law's parting shots echoed around the poolside. Michael could only stare at the water's surface, unable to respond to his mother's words. After lunch, a ship-wide announcement was made. We have received reports of shark sightings around the vessel this morning. For safety reasons, swimming in outdoor pools and decks will be temporarily prohibited. As evening approached, the ship began buzzing with preparations for the anniversary party. The deck was being decorated, and live music arrangements were being set up. About 40 couples had been invited. In their room, Melissa was adjusting Daniel's bow tie. Blue jacket with a white shirt. When she said, "You look handsome," her son smiled happily. "I want to take a picture with Dad." At those words, Melissa nodded firmly. Even if her marriage was shaky, she wouldn't let the bond between father and son be destroyed. However, an unimaginable tragedy awaited this family. Behind the glamorous deck party, years of conflict were about to explode in a moment that was rapidly approaching. The evening deck was bathed in orange light. Anniversary party decorations for the 40-year celebration were everywhere. White-clothed tables were lined with champagne glasses, and a professional photographer was preparing for commemorative photos. A jazz band played gentle melodies. About 40 couples were enjoying this special night, sipping from their glasses. Waiters moved about with trays of hors d'oeuvres, creating an elegant atmosphere on deck. Yet a certain tension had crept into this peaceful scene. Carol Brown was already several glasses into the champagne. Her cheeks were flushed, and her usually graceful demeanor was gradually crumbling. William watched her with worried eyes. "Carol, perhaps you should rest. Be quiet. This is our anniversary. No one will ruin it." Melissa heard this conversation from a short distance away. Her palm, holding Daniel's hand, was slightly sweaty. "Hey, Mom. Can I take a picture with Dad?" Her son's innocent voice brought her back to reality. "Yes, of course. I'll go get him." Michael was standing near his mother, as if on guard. When Melissa approached, his body tensed slightly. "Daniel wants to take a picture with you." "Ah, right. That's when it happened." Near the deck railing, Carol raised her voice. "For 40 years, we've built a perfect family." Her voice was slurred with alcohol. The surrounding conversations gradually stopped. "But my son betrayed my expectations. Marrying that woman, and then, that child." Carol's gaze turned toward Daniel. "That child should never have existed." The deck fell silent at her sudden outburst. The live music stopped, and the waiters froze in place. The eyes of 40 couples all turned toward the Brown family. "Mother, please stop." Michael's voice trembled. But Carol began shouting even louder. "Don't you understand what I'm saying? You're a Brown family son. Yet you." She suddenly began walking toward Daniel. Though her steps were unsteady from drinking, her eyes held an unusual gleam. "Mother!" "Carol!" Michael and William shouted simultaneously. Melissa tried to embrace Daniel quickly, but Carol's movements were faster. "Your child doesn't belong in this family." With those words, Carol grabbed Daniel's arm. Her son's scream echoed. Melissa cried out desperately. "Stop! Let him go." But Carol's strength was unnaturally powerful. Driven by alcohol and madness, she dragged Daniel toward the railing. "Michael! Help!" To Melissa's desperate plea, her husband hesitated for a moment before responding coldly. "Mother is right." In that instant, an unimaginable scene unfolded. Daniel was dragged to the deck railing. Then Carol's hands lifted the boy's body. "Mom!" Daniel's anguished cry echoed in the twilight sky. And in the next moment, the small body was thrown overboard from Carol's hands. Melissa's scream pierced the air. That's when someone unexpected moved. William, who had been quietly seated until then, suddenly stood up. "Carol! What have you done?" William's voice was filled with a rage no one had ever heard before. As if 40 years of silence had exploded all at once. "Now our family line will." As Carol began to speak triumphantly, William's large frame charged toward her. "You foolish woman." William's hands grabbed Carol's waist. And then an incredible scene unfolded. Without hesitation, William threw his wife into the sea from the same spot where she had just thrown their grandson. Carol's scream echoed. Then 2 splashes. Man overboard. 2 people in the water. Emergency situation. The captain's voice rang out over the ship's speakers. "Activate shark deterrent systems. Launch rescue boats immediately." The crew sprang into action. The shark sighting from hours earlier crossed everyone's mind. The Florida coast in spring was when sharks were most active. And now, 2 people had been thrown into the sea. Melissa clutched the railing, desperately searching for any sign of her son. A small shadow in the waves. And another larger one. The ship had fallen into complete panic. The 40 couples were screaming, and some even fainted. Waiters ran around throwing life preservers, while the captain's instructions continued to fly. Michael just stood there, dumbfounded. The blood had drained from his face as he gripped the railing with trembling hands. William sat quietly in a chair, as if accepting the weight of what he had just done. 40 years of marriage. And what had just happened? He seemed to be quietly accepting it all. The professional rescue team quickly lowered the lifeboats. But it was a race against time. The sun had already set, and darkness was approaching. Melissa closed her eyes in prayer. "Daniel, please live, please." As the rescue boat's engine roared, everyone held their breath watching the rescue operation. Melissa remained clutching the railing, continuing to pray. Michael was still in shock, sitting in a corner of the deck. "Over there." A rescuer's voice rang out. The searchlight caught a small figure desperately clinging to an orange life preserver. "Daniel." Melissa's cry echoed over the night sea. The rescue boat quickly approached. With the skilled movements of experienced rescuers, Daniel was safely pulled aboard. Shortly after, Carol was found about 50 meters away. Both rescued safely, taking them to the medical bay immediately. The captain's announcement brought sighs of relief from the passengers. The medical bay was tense. Daniel had mild hypothermia and a scrape on his right arm, but was otherwise unharmed. Carol similarly suffered only from lowered body temperature with no major injuries. Mom. At Daniel's small voice, Melissa couldn't help but embrace him. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. She repeated words of apology through her tears. Just then, the medical bay door opened, and two police officers entered. Wearing Florida State Police uniforms, they had already received a report from the captain. Mrs. Melissa Brown, please tell us what happened. A female officer with a gentle tone sat next to Melissa. The questioning continued until late into the night. Statements from 40 witnesses. Ship surveillance camera footage. And accounts from those involved. William admitted all guilt to the police. It's true that I threw my wife into the sea. However, it was the only way to save my grandson. His voice was strong, as if he had regained his own will for the first time in 40 years. Meanwhile, Carol was having a breakdown in her hospital room. I did nothing wrong. That child. Her words became increasingly incoherent. According to the doctor's diagnosis, she was in a temporary state of confusion due to years of mental stress and alcohol influence. The next morning, the ship was heading urgently to the nearest port. Michael had finally found his voice again. Melissa. He entered the medical bay. However, when Daniel saw his father, he trembled in fear and hid behind his mother. Leave. Melissa's voice was cold. Don't ever appear before us again. At that moment, Michael seemed to finally understand the magnitude of his mistake. Mother is right. That one phrase had changed everything. During the police investigation, shocking facts came to light one after another. Carol's control was more serious than imagined. Even Michael's promotions were all due to his mother's influence. Pressure from his brother-in-law, a company executive. And Michael's own lack of will. Her obsession with her son had been serious for quite some time, the police psychologist explained. To her, her son was a possession. The reality of him having a child and a new family was something she absolutely could not accept. Regarding William's actions, the prosecutor's office indicated they would not press charges. It was judged as nearly self-defense. A week later, back in Boston, Melissa immediately began divorce proceedings. I will have full custody of our child. Michael could say nothing to this demand. Carol was admitted to a high-end psychiatric facility. Years of controlling behavior and distorted love had finally taken their toll on her mental state. In her pursuit of the illusion of a perfect family, she had lost touch with reality. William paid for his wife's hospitalization costs, then placed all his assets in trust for Daniel's education. This is the last act of atonement I can offer. With those words, he quietly disappeared from their lives. A new life was about to begin. Melissa resolved to return to work as a doctor. She sold the house in Cambridge and moved to a small town in the Boston suburbs. At his new school, Daniel slowly began to smile again. "Mom, I want to swim again." When Daniel said this one day, Melissa couldn't hold back her tears. The emotional wounds were still deep. However, they had definitely taken their first step toward a new life. Sessions with child counselors, trauma care therapy, mother-son group therapy. All of these were part of their healing process. 6 months after the incident, Daniel started swimming again, this time at the local swimming club. "It's okay. No one can hurt us anymore." Watching her son from the poolside, Melissa made this vow. A tragedy caused by distorted love. But beyond it, a new light was shining. The true bond between mother and child would surely guide them forward. In the evening, Melissa stood on the balcony of their new home. A gentle breeze caressed her hair, as if blessing their new life. In the maternity ward of St. Mary's General Hospital, the gentle spring sunlight streaming through the windows softly illuminated the pristine white walls of the nursery. Carol Anderson gazed at her sleeping child through the glass, wishing this moment could last forever. "The baby is doing wonderfully," came the nurse's cheerful voice, bringing Carol back to reality. Her first childbirth at 40. Despite being considered high risk, she had managed to deliver safely. As she contemplated balancing her research career at a biotech firm with her new family life, she felt a mixture of anxiety and anticipation. Carol, who held a PhD in biology from the University of Chicago and worked as a senior researcher at a Boston biotech company, had lived solely for her career until that investment seminar 3 years ago. It was at the reception following her lecture on pharmaceutical development that she met Thomas Anderson, an investment bank analyst. "Mrs. Anderson," called a voice. It was Dr. Stephen Murphy, the head of obstetrics. "Everything is ready for discharge. You can go home with your baby tomorrow morning." Carol smiled and nodded, but there was a hint of tension in her expression. It wasn't just the anxiety of being a new mother. The presence of her mother-in-law, Barbara Anderson, weighed heavily on her mind. Barbara, despite being a board member of St. Mary's General Hospital, hadn't visited the room once in these 3 days. Instead, she had been sending various advice through hospital staff about the importance of breastfeeding, traditional postpartum care, and most notably, educational policies for the Anderson family heir. Thomas, a Princeton graduate working at State Street Corporation, had been apologetically watching his mother's excessive interference. Since losing his first wife Jane in an accident, he had become more susceptible to his mother's influence. Meeting Carol had been a turning point in his life. The couple had met at a medical investment seminar and carefully nurtured their relationship. It took them a year to decide on marriage. Throughout this time, Barbara's reluctant attitude had remained consistent. To Barbara, who came from a proud upper-class traditional family, Carol, from Chicago's middle class, might not have been deemed suitable as a partner for her son. Mother still hasn't. Carol began to ask when Thomas visited at dusk, but swallowed her words. Her husband, though showing signs of fatigue from his work as an investment bank analyst, offered a gentle smile. "She said she's busy with work. It's the fiscal closing period for the board." They both knew this was just an excuse. Barbara's true feelings had been revealed when they set up their new home in Boston's upscale suburbs. "It's too close to where Jane's memories are." Since then, Thomas had carefully tried to avoid being caught between his mother and wife. Jane had been perfect. Coming from a Boston Brahmin family and raised in the same social circles as Barbara, she had been an impeccable wife for the Anderson family's heir. After losing her suddenly in an accident, Barbara's attachment to her son had intensified. Having lost her husband 10 years earlier, perhaps her son was her only emotional support. "Tomorrow marks the beginning of a new life," Thomas said, taking Carol's hand. Carol in her J.Crew dress was a stark contrast to Jane, who had favored Chanel. However, her intellectual and warm personality had steadily healed Thomas's heart. Outside the window, the spring evening was deepening. Tulips bloomed vibrantly across Boston's cityscape. The setting sun cast a warm light through the hospital room, as if blessing their future. Yet, no one could notice the unknown shadow that was creeping into that light. Carol looked at her baby again through the nursery window. A tiny life. The beginning of a new family. While it represented certain hope, for someone else, it was an unbearable reality. In the quiet residential area of Newton, young maple leaves swayed in the wind. Among the rows of elegant colonial-style houses, the Andersons' new white residence warmly reflected the spring sunlight. Finally home. Carol sighed with relief as she gazed at her baby in the passenger seat. She thanked Jennifer, the nurse who had driven them, and carefully stepped out of the car. Thanks to the hospital's transportation service, they had managed to discharge without interrupting her husband's work. That's when it happened. Mrs. Carol Anderson. At the sudden voice of a man appearing before her, Carol instinctively held her baby tighter. "I'm Mike Donovan from the Metropolitan Police Special Investigation Unit. We need to talk about that baby." "What? What do you mean?" Her voice trembled. Nurse Jennifer watched the situation with a confused expression. The spring breeze began to shake the maple leaves more violently. "We received a report that this baby was kidnapped. Please check this birth certificate." The moment Carol looked at the document the detective held out, her legs began to shake. Her name was indeed there. But the date was wrong. It showed a date from 20 years ago. "This is a mistake. This child is. I gave birth to this baby 3 days ago." Her desperate voice echoed through the quiet residential street. Curious eyes began peering from neighboring windows. Jennifer nervously pulled out her mobile phone. "There is no record of your delivery in the hospital system. Instead, there's a record of a stillbirth from 20 years ago." "That's not true. Ask Dr. Murphy. The nurses too." At that moment, Carol began to recall something unsettling. During her hospital stay, something had felt off. The subtle attitudes of the staff, the unnatural delay in discharge procedures, and "Please let me call Thomas. My husband." As Carol reached for her phone with trembling hands, a female detective approached. "I'm sorry, but under these circumstances, we'll need to take temporary custody of the baby." "No. This child is mine. Please, just listen a little longer." With an anguished cry, Carol held her baby tightly. However, trained police officers gently but firmly separated the small life from its mother. "This can't be." Carol's vision began to blur. What was happening before her eyes felt surreal, like a nightmare. But the cold sensation of handcuffs on her wrists confirmed this was undeniable reality. At that moment, she noticed a familiar luxury car stopping beyond the police car. Mother-in-law Barbara Anderson stepped out of the car. With her usual elegant bearing, but wearing a somewhat different expression. She held some documents in her hand. Why? The question was drowned out by the sound of the police car door closing. No sirens were activated, as if being considerate not to disturb the peace of this upscale neighborhood. The scenery outside the car window began to move slowly. The tulips, young maple leaves, and Barbara standing at the entrance gradually receded into the distance. In the police car heading to the station, Carol desperately tried to recall the events from 3 days ago. The smooth delivery. The kind hospital staff. The first meeting with her baby. And the slightly off sense of time. Everything had been too perfect. As if it had been meticulously planned by someone. "Let me know if you feel unwell," came the gentle voice of the female detective from the front seat. Her name tag, Rachel Green, gleamed in the spring sunlight. Carol rested her forehead against the cold window, its sensation making this situation feel even more real. Then her phone began to ring. It was from Thomas. But she was no longer allowed to answer it. The ringtone merely continued to echo emptily in the car. "I recommend St. Mary's General Hospital." It had been 2 months after confirming her pregnancy. In the living room of their upscale suburban Boston home, Barbara had announced this with a perfect smile. In the space surrounded by European antique furniture, those words had resonated without any sense of dissonance. But Mom, Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center might be. "Thomas, you understand, don't you?" Barbara's voice was soft but firm. Dressed in a gray Chanel suit, she blended perfectly into this luxurious reception room, like one of its furnishings. "I'm a board member there. I can arrange the best medical team. Besides..." A moment of hesitation. It seemed so calculated, it could only be an act. "Jane also." The air froze. Carol unconsciously gripped the hem of her and Taylor dress tightly. Whenever the first wife's name came up in conversation, time seemed to stop in this house. "I understand." At Carol's words, Barbara nodded with satisfaction. It looked like a smile of victory. From the next day, preparations for the delivery began. Barbara's influence extended to every corner of the hospital. The consultation with Dr. Murphy, the head of obstetrics, the selection of the midwife team, the arrangement of a private room. Everything proceeded perfectly, and somewhat unnaturally smoothly. "Carol, are you all right?" One day after a checkup, Thomas asked worriedly. He had come to the hospital between important meetings at State Street Corporation. "Yes, I'm fine. It's just..." Carol continued, carefully choosing her words. "The nurses seem a bit strange. It's like they're being overly cautious with me." It wasn't just her imagination. There was a clear sense of unease in the hospital staff's behavior. Excessively polite, yet seeming to hide their true feelings. This was especially noticeable when Barbara was at the hospital. "Isn't it because you're the board member's daughter-in-law?" Thomas said with a gentle smile. But Carol couldn't help feeling there was something more to it. Through daily checkups, Carol gradually learned about the hospital's internal affairs. Barbara's influence wasn't merely superficial. Over 20 years of experience as a board member, connections through charitable work, and ties with Jane's family lineage. These were intricately intertwined, casting a web-like influence over the entire hospital. "Ma'am, did you know about the transition to the new system?" One day, an elderly nurse approached her, speaking as if making casual conversation. "System?" "Yes, the hospital's record system. We're switching from the old one to the new." The conversation was interrupted, but it continued to nag at Carol's mind. Later, she would realize its significance. As she entered late pregnancy, Barbara's interference grew stronger. "This is the Anderson family heir. Education is most important. I think Jane should have done this. I want you to understand our traditions." Behind these words, Jane's shadow was always lurking. "Mom thought of Jane like a daughter," Thomas said one night, unusually speaking about the past. Meeting at the tennis club, their romantic newlywed life on Nantucket Island. And then, that sudden accident. They both grew up in the same social circles. The rest of his words sank into his glass of whiskey. As the due date approached, subtle changes began appearing in the hospital atmosphere. Particularly noticeable was the rotation of night shift staff. Unfamiliar faces increased, each seeming to harbor some secret. "We're increasing personnel at night for data migration work," Kate Wilson, a young system administration staff member, explained, her expression showing slight conflict. A week before the due date, Carol caught her first glimpse of Barbara's true nature. In the hospital boardroom. An unexpected visit, accidentally overheard conversation. "She's not suitable for our lineage." An ice-cold voice. There was a dangerous resonance beneath the usual elegant mask. "But, Chairwoman, with records from 20 years ago, no one will notice." At the time, she couldn't understand the meaning of that conversation. But now, in the police car, all the pieces were beginning to connect. The seemingly perfect preparations. The unnaturally kind treatment. And Barbara's abnormal obsession. Her phone rang again. This time from her colleague at the Boston biotech firm. Probably about a research data deadline. But now, that was the least of her concerns. Outside the window, Boston's cityscape rolled by. The shadows of skyscrapers crossed the police car windows like black bands. The spring sunlight shone brilliantly, as if mocking this situation. Boston Police Department Special Investigation Unit. In the dim office, the bluish light of monitors flickered. "Green, are you sure about this lead?" Unit Chief James Murphy eyed rookie detective Rachel Green skeptically. Her desk was piled with massive amounts of documentation. "Yes. There are clear inconsistencies in St. Mary's General Hospital's record system." Her voice carried conviction unusual for a rookie. At 29, despite excellent grades at the FBI Academy, she had deliberately chosen the Boston Police Department, and she possessed intuition second to none. "This is a report from the board chairwoman, Barbara Anderson. You understand the weight of that name?" The chief's voice carried a warning. But Rachel didn't give up. "That's precisely why, sir." She turned the monitor toward the chief. The screen displayed records from both the hospital's old database and new system side by side. The stillbirth record from 20 years ago. There were already unnatural points when it was digitized from paper records. The mouse cursor highlighted various anomalies in the data. Inconsistencies in recording times. Subtle discrepancies in doctors' signatures. And most importantly, this font is different from what was used at the time. Rachel recalled the document analysis techniques she learned during FBI training. Attention to detail sometimes reveals greater truths. Also, the surveillance footage. She opened another window. The screen showed people moving through hospital corridors. The date was 3 days ago, Carol Anderson's scheduled delivery date. Look at this nurse. The footage captured a nurse passing in front of the nursery. The uniform is the same. But the way they walk is different. There's a subtle unnaturalness you wouldn't see in professional nurses. Is that all? The chief's voice remained skeptical. No. Rachel produced records from a confidential interview with Kate Wilson, a young staff member from the hospital's system administration. She testified that she received special instructions from Chairwoman Barbara. Special instructions? Yes. To modify old data under the cover of the system migration. Kate's testimony was like piercing through an ice wall. Rachel dug deeper. Hospital personnel records. Board meeting minutes. And newspaper articles from 20 years ago. They all formed strange patterns around Barbara Anderson. I also investigated the first wife, Jane. Rachel spread out old society page clippings. They showed a photo of young Jane and Barbara smiling at a charity event. Their relationship was more than just mother-in-law and daughter-in-law. Boston's upper society. The pride of generations old and noble families. And the twisted obsession lurking in their shadows. All of these formed the background of this case. And this too. She displayed different footage captured by the hospital's security cameras. The night before the scheduled delivery. Barbara entering the hospital's record storage room. And hours later, another person leaving the same room. During these hours, no regular staff. Wait. The chief showed a serious expression for the first time. So Carol Anderson's delivery. Yes. It actually took place. But the records were deliberately altered. Replaced with stillbirth records from 20 years ago. The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. Rachel picked up a photo from her desk. It showed Carol holding her newborn baby, her expression filled with maternal joy deeper than any happiness in this world. This isn't just a kidnapping case. Rachel stood up. The spring evening light was streaming through the window. This is a twisted form of love from a woman trying to protect her perfect family. At that moment, hurried footsteps were heard from the hallway. The door opened, and a young officer burst in. Detective Green. We've received information that Barbara Anderson is heading to the hospital. Rachel immediately grabbed her coat. Let's go. Behind her, she heard the chief heave a heavy sigh. But now, there was no time to worry about that. The truth was finally about to emerge. When they rushed out of police headquarters, night was beginning to fall over Boston. The police siren cut through the quiet residential air. In the boardroom of St. Mary's General Hospital, Barbara Anderson stood alone against the night view. In her hand, she held an old photograph. A single shot capturing young Jane and herself smiling on a Nantucket beach. A perfect moment from the past, sealed in time. Don't move further inside. Rachel Green's voice echoed behind her. Barbara turned slowly. Her expression no longer wore a mask. You wouldn't understand, Barbara's voice was quiet. What it means to protect a perfect family. A perfect family. Rachel stepped forward. You fabricated Carol's delivery and tried to take her baby. Is that your idea of a perfect family? Jane was perfect. Tears glistened in Barbara's eyes. She understood the pride of the Anderson family, having grown up in my world. Her breeding, her education, everything was impeccable. But that accident. She gazed out the window. Boston's night view sparkled like past glory. Then came Carol. Middle class from Chicago. She couldn't possibly understand Boston's traditions. Thomas deserved someone more. So the baby. The records from 20 years ago were perfect. Barbara smiled sadly. My hospital. Trustworthy staff. And the perfect opportunity of a system migration. Everything should have been a perfect plan. At that moment, footsteps were heard from the hallway. Mother. Thomas burst into the room with Carol. Why would you do this? His voice was filled with deep sadness rather than anger. For your happiness. Happiness? Thomas's voice trembled. Don't you understand what makes me happy? When I met Carol, for the first time His words caught in his throat. But as if waiting for this moment, Carol stepped forward. Barbara, her voice was surprisingly gentle. I understand a little of how you feel. A mother's desire for her son's happiness. The inability to let go of a perfect past. Surprise flickered in Barbara's eyes. But new life is born to create the future, not to bind the past. Carol took out a photo of the baby. This child will create new history for the Anderson family. I want you to be part of that history too. Silence fell. At that moment, fireworks lit up the night sky. Light from Boston Bay gently illuminated the boardroom. The old photograph slipped from Barbara's hands. In that instant, all masks fell from her face. What remained was just the figure of a sad mother. Thomas rushed to embrace his mother. Mom, that's enough. Let's cherish the memories with Jane as memories. But we have a new family now. Rachel quietly began to leave, but Carol stopped her. Thank you for revealing the truth. Later, Barbara received a suspended sentence with probation. She resigned from the hospital board and was effectively forced to retire from social circles. However, 6 months later, a new family photo adorned the Anderson family living room. Carol and Thomas holding their baby in the center, and beside them, Barbara showing a genuine smile for the first time. Outside the window, Boston's autumn sunlight streamed in warmly, bathing the room in a golden glow that seemed to promise a brighter future for them all. My name is Giselle. At 35, I've built a 7-year career as a real estate agent in Brookline, an upscale suburb of Boston. Drawing on my experience in this neighborhood, I'm now recognized as a top performer, handling over 20 high-end properties annually. While my days were fulfilling as I poured myself into work, there was always a quiet longing in my heart for a family of my own. My life took a dramatic turn 3 years ago when I met Nathan, a vice president at an investment bank. At 37, he captured my heart at first sight with his gentle demeanor and inner strength. Highly regarded for both his professional capabilities and integrity, he, like me, valued his career while dreaming of having a family. After our wedding, we moved into a Victorian mansion built in the 19th century. Our newlywed life seemed perfect in this space where solid hardwood floors, antique furniture, and state-of-the-art security systems existed in harmony. Now, 6 months pregnant with our first child, I should have been enveloped in complete happiness. But everything began to change when my mother-in-law moved in. It happened in late February 2024. On a night when Massachusetts' bitter winter winds were howling, I received a phone call from Nathan. I froze when he told me Mother had a mild stroke. His voice trembled with anxiety, unlike his usual composed self. She raised me alone. For 25 years after Dad died in an accident, Mother sacrificed everything for me. Now it's our turn to take care of her. Nathan's decision was right. Of course it was. But at that time, I couldn't have imagined how dramatically this decision would change our lives. Nathan's mother, Eleanor, was a pillar of the community, a former city council member and current philanthropist who wore her gray hair in an immaculate chignon and dressed in luxury brands. With her perfect makeup and dignified bearing, she was the epitome of what everyone considered a lady. She seemed worthy of respect as she graciously hosted charity events and led church reading groups. However, at home, she was like a completely different person. The first signs of trouble appeared barely a week after she moved in. In this house, we always have dinner together at exactly 6 p.m. Not a minute late. Rice bowls must be arranged clockwise. Counterclockwise brings bad luck. The doormat must be cleaned twice daily. Appearances are everything, even without visitors. Each rule seemed minor on its own. But they multiplied rapidly, eventually becoming chains that bound my entire life. Nathan didn't seem to notice. Or perhaps he didn't want to notice. To his eyes, with his overseas business trips taking up more than 120 days a year, Eleanor still appeared as the perfect mother. In their thrice-weekly phone calls, she skillfully manipulated her son's perception. Mother is my hero. Even during the tough times after Dad passed away, she never showed any weakness. She raised me wonderfully all by herself. She's the most amazing woman. Each time I heard those words, my heart ached a little more. Her outward elegance versus her controlling behavior at home, the extreme duality gradually made me feel suffocated. But this was just the beginning. The real nightmare was yet to come. I discovered I was pregnant in early spring 2024. One morning in early March, as the street trees of Brookline were finally shedding their winter burden, I experienced unusual nausea and a home pregnancy test showed positive. Nathan wept with joy. After 7 years of fertility treatments, this pregnancy was our most cherished moment. However, Eleanor's attitude changed completely. When I tried to share my joy with her, pregnancy test in hand, she gave me an icy stare. Don't use pregnancy as an excuse to slack off. In my day, we managed housework perfectly even while pregnant. Nathan's laundry must be hand-washed. Iron everything twice. Dinner must have at least 3 dishes. Store-bought food is absolutely forbidden. From that moment, her demands regarding housework escalated to an abnormal degree. Up at 5 a.m. for cleaning the entire house. Garden maintenance. 3 home-cooked meals daily. Endless housework until 10 p.m. She even insisted I schedule prenatal checkups at times that wouldn't interfere with housework. Giselle, you're still so immature. This household wouldn't function without my guidance. Eleanor's words always began with criticism. She never once acknowledged my efforts. Instead, she constantly criticized me and bragged about her own perfect past. Meanwhile, Nathan's absences increased. Assigned to a major project in Asia, he was spending more than half of each month overseas. In their thrice-weekly calls, Eleanor cleverly manipulated the situation. "Oh, Giselle. She's trying her best. But she's still developing as a housewife. I'm kindly guiding her." Behind those words, her demands became more brutal by the day. When I suffered from morning sickness, she coldly dismissed it as lack of mental fortitude. When I couldn't eat due to nausea, she brushed it off as being spoiled. The situation took an even more serious turn. Around my 5th month of pregnancy, I began experiencing occasional dull pain in my lower abdomen. Though my obstetrician advised rest, Eleanor completely ignored this. Instead, her household demands increased. Rest is just an excuse. I know someone who ran a full marathon at 9 months pregnant. It's just your poor health management. My fear grew daily. Particularly unsettling was the strange expression Eleanor sometimes showed. Whenever she watched my growing belly, she'd display an almost hateful look. As if she had looked at someone else that way before. Sometimes, I wondered about an old photograph I found in the attic. It showed a young pregnant woman, just like me. The back read, Irene, 6 months pregnant, 2009, but Eleanor refused to discuss the photo. Then came the fateful day. Nathan was away on a 2-week business trip for an important project. Since morning, I had noticed signs of abnormal bleeding. The pain in my lower abdomen was the worst it had ever been. At 2 p.m. that day, I received an urgent call from my obstetrician. "Mrs. Walker, please come in immediately. There are concerning aspects in your test results. We may need immediate treatment." The doctor's voice carried obvious tension. "It's nothing serious. From my experience, there's no need to make a fuss. We're hosting the Whites from next door for dinner tonight. You need to prepare your best dishes." Eleanor dismissed the doctor's words as if she hadn't heard them. Outside, an early winter dusk was creeping in. Though the clock showed 4 p.m., shadows were already beginning to cover the room. A chill ran down my spine. I saw a look of madness in Eleanor's eyes that I'd never seen before. By 6 p.m. that evening, New England's winter darkness had already begun to envelop everything. The warm aroma of New England clam chowder wafted through the kitchen. But that smell only constricted my chest. The anxiety about abnormal bleeding, the intensifying abdominal pain, and above all, Eleanor's bizarre atmosphere had my entire body rigid with tension. Eleanor, I'm terribly sorry, but... I began with a trembling voice, both hands gripping the stainless steel kitchen counter for support. I need to go to the hospital. The baby might be in danger. At that moment, Eleanor's hands stopped moving. She slammed her knife onto the marble countertop and slowly turned toward me. In this house, family dinner takes priority. Her voice had completely lost its usual refinement. Several strands had come loose from her gray chignon, and her perfect makeup was distorted with anger. But the doctors are being dramatic. Eleanor cut me off, ranting. Things were different in my day. We managed housework perfectly even while pregnant. We're hosting Mr. and Mrs. White for dinner. We can't cancel over your minor health concerns. Outside the large kitchen window, street lights were beginning to illuminate one by one. Their light cast eerie shadows on Eleanor's face. From the neighboring white residence's windows, warm light spilled out. Tammy appeared to be reading by her usual second-floor window. Eleanor, please. The baby's movement. I pressed my hand against my abdomen, stumbling toward the entrance. That's when it happened. You useless daughter-in-law. As I turned around, a silver arc flashed before my eyes. A large pot of boiling clam chowder was flying toward me in a parabolic arc. Ah! Before my scream could echo, the scalding liquid hit my face and chest. Along with the burning sensation on my skin, a dull impact struck my abdomen. A woman of your caliber isn't fit to be entrusted with my precious son. Eleanor's screams seemed to echo from far away. As my vision gradually blurred, I collapsed to the floor. Just like Irene, that woman too. Eleanor's muttering barely reached my ears. Before I could understand its meaning, consciousness began to fade. At that moment, outside the kitchen window, Mrs. White's figure flashed briefly. In her hand was some kind of device. Yes, it was a smartphone camera. The next instant, piercing sirens split the winter night. Red and blue lights began to flash in the darkness. I've called emergency services and the police. I heard Tammy's voice. As it turned out, she had been documenting my interactions with Eleanor for the past 6 months. Her instincts as a former counselor had detected the abnormality in this house. It's okay, Giselle. You're safe now. Tammy's warm voice echoed at the edges of my consciousness. As the ambulance sirens drew closer, something moved inside me. It was the baby's response. A small but definite movement, as if saying, "Keep going, Mom." In that moment, I made a decision. This isn't the end. It's a new beginning. The beginning of a battle to reveal the truth. Even as consciousness continued to fade, I made a vow in my heart. This nightmarish evening won't end as just a tragedy. I will expose the truth lurking beneath Eleanor's mask. And I must shed light on the shadow named Irene. As I was lifted onto the ambulance stretcher, I silently vowed in my heart. Wait for me, baby. Mommy will protect you no matter what. The clock showed exactly 6:30 p.m. In the intensive care unit at Massachusetts General Hospital, I regained consciousness. The pain from burns on my face and chest was dulled by morphine, but a burning sensation still lingered throughout my body. The baby. When I asked in a hoarse voice, the attending physician showed a relieved expression. The heartbeat is stable. However, the next 72 hours are critical. Complete bed rest is necessary. At those words, I couldn't help but cry. But they weren't tears of relief. Because what I saw on the hospital room's television screen was something unbelievable. In a domestic violence incident that occurred last night in an upscale Brookline neighborhood, suspect Eleanor Walker has been arrested. The suspect is also suspected of involvement in a similar incident 15 years ago. The screen showed Eleanor being taken into police custody. Her once perfect gray chignon was disheveled, her luxury brand two-piece suit wrinkled. But her expression showed no remorse. Instead, there was an almost satisfied smile. The next moment, the hospital room door burst open. Giselle. Nathan had apparently come straight to the hospital on an emergency flight from Asia, his suit wrinkled. It was an uncharacteristically distraught appearance for someone usually so composed. Why would Mother? His voice trembled. In his hand was an old photograph, the same one of Irene I had found in the attic. The police report exceeded our imagination. 15 years ago, Nathan's first wife Irene Ford was also 6 months pregnant. Her disappearance had been processed as abandoning her husband and disappearing, but in reality, during the investigation, shocking evidence was discovered in Eleanor's basement. Irene's passport, mobile phone, and a diary. The last page contained disturbing entries. I'm scared of Eleanor. She's not happy about my pregnancy. Yesterday too, she accidentally spilled hot soup on me. Nathan doesn't believe me. Help. I remember that day. Tammy's testimony illuminated the darkness from 15 years ago. She had just moved into the neighboring house at the time. I heard Irene screaming. But Eleanor's political influence was too strong, no one could speak up. That's why this time, I couldn't let it pass. The video and audio records she collected over 6 months meticulously documented the madness lurking beneath Eleanor's perfect mask. The investigation revealed an even deeper darkness. The root of Eleanor's abnormality traced back 35 years. After her husband's accidental death, she developed an obsession with her son Nathan. Raising the perfect son became her life's purpose. In the process, Eleanor tried to completely control her son's life. In particular, her pathological aversion to anyone who threatened her position as mother was beyond reason. Her perfectionism and desire for control were outwardly channeled into building her reputation as a philanthropist. However, at home, they manifested in a distorted form as violence. I was right. Eleanor's words during interrogation vividly illustrated her madness. Those women tried to take my precious son away. Especially with children, trying to bear my dear grandchildren. But that child is different. That child doesn't carry my blood. So. Nathan collapsed into a chair while reading his mother's statement. Why didn't I notice? His self-reproach was deep and heavy. Over 120 days of overseas travel annually. Absolute trust in his mother. And his own blindness in easily believing his first wife's disappearance. Let's put an end to this. I held Nathan's hand while still attached to my fore. This isn't the end. It's a new beginning. Spring sunlight streamed through the hospital room window. And as if in response, the small life inside me moved again. The clock showed 3 p.m., exactly the time Irene had disappeared 15 years ago. June 2024, Boston District Court. Early summer sunlight streamed into the solemn courtroom. Defendant Eleanor Walker. The jury's verdict will now be read. As the judge's voice resonated, I unconsciously placed my hand on my now large belly. 8 months pregnant. We had fought a long battle since that incident. On the counts of aggravated assault, intentional harm to a fetus, and evidence tampering in the Irene Ford disappearance case from 15 years ago, guilty on all counts. As murmurs filled the courtroom, Eleanor's expression twisted momentarily. But she quickly regained her characteristic graceful smile. I hereby sentence you to 20 years in prison. In the front row, Nathan closed his eyes. A single tear rolled down his cheek. Tammy, sitting beside him, gently placed her hand on his shoulder. After the sentencing, Eleanor spoke in public for the first time. I only did what was best as a mother. The entire courtroom fell silent at these words. To be the perfect mother, to protect my perfect son, that was my everything. Surprisingly, her expression showed no remorse. Rather, it seemed to carry a sense of accomplishment. A week after the sentencing, there was a new development. We received a call from the Brookline police. Items believed to belong to Irene Ford have been discovered in a hidden room in Eleanor's basement. These were decisive pieces of evidence revealing the truth from 15 years ago. Among the items were a maternity handbook with the expected delivery date and an unsent letter to Nathan. Dear Nathan, if this letter ever reaches you, I may no longer be in this world. But I want you to know, my love for you was real. And my love for our unborn child. The letter was dated the day before she disappeared. The investigation continued to reveal the dark side of Eleanor's charitable activities. Evidence tampering using political influence, pressure on the police, and above all, the cunning way she perfectly maintained her public facade. Mother's actions can never be forgiven. Nathan's words at the press conference were powerful. However, her actions have taught us an important lesson. That domestic violence and control are never just personal issues. They are problems that society as a whole must address. These words resonated with many people, especially becoming a beacon of hope for those suffering in similar situations. In late July, we moved to a new house. A quiet residential area in Cambridge. A light-filled home surrounded by old trees. While helping with the move, Tammy found a photograph while organizing boxes. It was Irene's photo from 15 years ago. Let's display this photo in the living room of our new house, I suggested, and Nathan quietly nodded. Because Irene is someone we should never forget. That evening, we held a small barbecue party in the backyard. The Whites, the detective in charge, and our legal team, everyone came to celebrate the beginning of our new life. Cheers! As glasses were raised, I looked up at the sky. A shooting star gleamed in the summer twilight. At that moment, there was a strong movement in my belly. This little one is very active. Nathan smiled gently as he placed his hand on my stomach. She'll surely grow up to be strong. Everyone nodded at Tammy's words. On the morning of August 15th, a bit earlier than expected, our daughter was born. A healthy baby girl weighing 3,200 grams. Her name is Irene. Irene Walker. Illuminated by the morning sun streaming through the hospital window, the baby showed her first smile. In that moment, I was certain. This is what a real family means. Not seeking perfection, but accepting each other's imperfections and supporting one another. That's the true nature of family. In a vase in the corner of the hospital room stood wildflowers that Tammy had picked. Among them was a single white lily, Irene's favorite flower. As Nathan held the baby, he whispered quietly, "This is our new beginning." Outside, a gentle wind heralding a new season tapped softly against the window.